All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another Green Room conversation. Really excited to have special guest Amy with us. I'll give her a second to introduce herself in 1 minute here. But if this is your very first time in the Green Room, what it is, we're talking about our careers, our lives, our stories, the different um, peaks that we've hit in our different experiences, and then even some of the valleys and the challenges. So the whole objective is to give the listener, the viewer, some free game, some different things to help them along their path and their journey as they move forward. So really excited to have another one to bring to you. And without any further ado, I'd love to pass the popcorn over to Amy to introduce herself to you all. Amy, where are you? Who are you? What are you up to these days? Just give a couple of minutes worth of intro.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So my name is Amy Chantasirivisal. I am a software engineering leader. I have been in the startup space primarily for the majority of my career. And so right now I'm currently in between roles searching for a new thing, but I have a background in front-end engineering. I was self-taught. I basically made a hobby into a job. I went to school for biology and did nothing with that degree. And so came up as a front-end engineer. And then I realized that it's not enough to have smart people in a room. You actually have to be organized. You have to be able to set priorities, be able to set expectations, all of that. And so I made my jump into engineering leadership through project management primarily, because I had reached a point in my own career where I got frustrated with the inability or sort of like the difficulty in getting things done. And so through the course of the years have just been at different smaller companies and startups, helping to build engineering teams and develop engineering team culture and things like that. That's a very high level overview of my background. I'm actually in Fremont, California, so I'm in the East Bay.
Perfect. Thanks for that. And I haven't done this before, but let's kick off our conversation since it's a Friday afternoon with something that maybe made you laugh or smile throughout this week. We'll start it on a happy note. What's one good piece of news you can share with the folks who might be watching this?
Oh gosh, good news. What do I have going on? So now that I'm like in between jobs, I've been spending a lot of time outdoors and just getting sort of fresh air and being away from the computer. One of the things that has brought me joy this week is that I bought myself a miter saw and I've started learning how to like woodwork. I've been doing a little bit of it as sort of like a hobby, and I decided to like actually start investing in some stuff. And so it's been fun to like use power tools and work with my hands, because so often my work is at a computer, right? And so being able to get out there and physically manipulate stuff has been very satisfying.
Very cool. Definitely not one to like if I walk past you on the street, like I wouldn't assume that you like
Yeah.
love power tools or anything like that. So I'm glad I asked that
I was
question.
gonna say, I was like, I guess I'm just like a tech head to the core, regardless of what type of like gadget it is. So it's like it could be, stuff in the hardware space. It could be tools. I mean, I guess things that you can tinker with, right? Like I've always been drawn to being crafty, I guess, in that way.
Yeah, maybe that's a good place to start like the conversation. Thinking about like how you even became curious about the work that you've been in for a long time now. Take us back to maybe when you were a little girl. Like, did you always imagine that you would be some kind of builder or engineer or tinkerer, or were you in a different mind state? Take us back to like young.
Sure. The earliest thing that earliest profession that I remember wanting to be was a veterinarian. So working with animals and things like that, because it's like as a kid, animals are cute. You want to like help animals. And then I just realized I was too squeamish for that as I got older. And so I guess like when I think back on it, I never really thought that I would find myself in a career like with software. I didn't even know that was like a thing that you could do. And maybe this is dating myself a little bit, right? But I got my first computer in like late junior high. And that was when computers were just not in most people's homes. And so, I was really lucky and privileged to be able to actually have access to one. And, as a result, I was tinkering with them, both on like the software side and trying to make the computer like just do things, but also in building the computers. And so like the actual like components and sourcing them and like actually building my own machines and things like that. And so that was just sort of like this hobby that I had through high school. And then when I got into college, I ended up going into environmental biology because it was just a topic that was of interest to me. And I didn't really know what I was going to do with it after I graduated, only that like it was intellectually stimulating. And so that's why I wanted to, take that as a major. And I think that as, my parents were first generation immigrants too. And so they moved here to California, to the US in the late 70s or mid 70s. And, I think as a result of that, I wasn't necessarily prepared to go to college or to like actually plan out what I was going to do with that higher education. And, my parents didn't have, sort of like that knowledge either to share. Right. And so I kind of just went into college, just pursuing something that was interesting to me. And then through that, I continued to work on the software side of things, primarily because I was joining clubs on campus that they needed their updates on their websites because they were having events and they needed someone to update their calendar. And so I would just sort of raise my hand and say, I sort of know how to do this. I don't know anything about how you've built your website, but I can figure it out. And so I ended up becoming a webmaster. That was still a term that people used.
Yeah.
I ended up becoming webmaster for like a number of different groups on campus. And that's how I sort of kept up some of my skills, in those years. And then I just sort of fell into the entry level position, which most people cannot do these days, given how sort of like competitive the market is. But, I was, again, older, so lucky to be able to just, answer a job ad and have someone interview me and take me on as pretty much like an intern.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And kind of having the parent as immigrants coming into the country and being the first generation is kind of a common thread for a lot of friends that I had. But one thing that's interesting about your story is that it seems like you went into something that was just intellectually interesting and stimulating for you. A lot of people that I talk to, their parents are like, you better be a doctor or an engineer or like a lawyer, like one of those types of things. So your parents never like kind of guided you or made you.
Oh, they did. No, they definitely had that desire for me, but they didn't know how to like encourage or how to facilitate it, right? And so, the sort of like that expectation was there, like be a doctor, be a lawyer, or something with like a high-paying career, something in in the sciences, right? And so, the environmental biology was like one possible path to pre-med, which, a couple of years into college, I decided that I wasn't going to pursue, right? And so, yeah, they definitely wanted that for me, but just didn't know how to help me get there.
Got it. Got it. So, the umbrella that this Green Room series is under is called community college. So like that's the kind of theme that we've got going. And those two words like community and college kind of hold different weights and different importances for different people. So talk to me a little bit about the community, maybe as you were growing up and like what that was like, the support, the maybe the differences if you were around different ethnic and different cultural components in your neighborhood, and then like the importance of community as you've made your way into a career, even your family now, like interfacing with different communities as you go in and out of context. So talk to us a little bit about what the power of community has meant for you from a young age all the way up to present day.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I was younger, so I grew up in like a solidly middle class suburb in LA. And the grade schools that I went to were primarily like East Asian and white, I would say. And so, sort of my proximity to like white culture, American culture is very very like ingrained, I guess, in me, right? And then also at the same time, My parents were working a lot. They, like I said, like first-gen immigrants, and so they were like running their own business. They had started a couple of restaurants in LA, and so were busy a lot of the time. And so I mentioned this primarily because, as I've reflected on it as I've gotten older, I feel like I've missed out on that ethnic side of my community, of like interfacing with Thai people. My family is from Thailand. And so being able to sort of like actually have that in my life when I was younger was limited, right? Because my parents didn't really have a lot of time to like introduce me to like Thai communities that exist, and there are a lot of them in Southern California. And so that's like one thing that I reflect on, that I like kind of missed out on for sure, and I'm a little bit like regretful of, but also I understand sort of the situation and how that happened. So in any case, in my younger years, I definitely grew up with just a lot of kind of like the American experience, I guess, kind of like the latchkey kid. You walk yourself home from school, you like watch TV, you eat something, prep your own dinners, right? Type of thing. And in like the formative years, I would say junior high, high school, that's where I think community really kind of comes into play, and that's where you start to discover who you are as a person. And so, the people that I surrounded myself with, there's kind of like mixed groups here and there, I would say, but I tried to kind of surround myself with people who were like ambitious and wanted to kind of like expand their horizons and whatnot, and kind of think about what was life outside of this little suburb that we lived in. And I think that's what really, in going to college, what led me to moving to Northern California, and I went to UC Berkeley. And so part of me going there was actually because I wanted to move away from LA, because I had the option of pursuing other education closer to home in SoCal, but I just felt like what I really wanted for myself was to discover my own individuality, right? And like kind of develop my own connections outside of what I knew to be as home. And so that was kind of my earlier life. And what I've kind of, my definition of community has kind of evolved over the years, in that now I think about community as support, right? Whereas I think when I was younger, I thought about community as like-mindedness and, people who held the same values as you, which I guess is still true today, but that piece of support, I feel like, has been more critical in recent years, especially because as I've become a leader, it's a lot of responsibility, because now, I have influence and power over other people and their careers and their lives, right? And it's very easy to second guess yourself in those situations, because that the actions that you take as an individual could potentially have like those bigger ripple effects on a group of people, right? And so the support that comes from community has been super important to not only sort of like validate the types of things that I've been doing, or like the philosophies that I have as a leader, but also to really help reassure that a lot of the times the decisions that you're making, even if they're hard or for sort of like the best possible reasons or things like that. And so I have found lots of different communities centered around identities, my own identities, right? So as a mom, as someone who is Asian, as someone who is a woman in tech, for example. So there's kind of like these different identities and groups that I find support within these days.
Yeah, that's a great thing to kind of reflect on, and to even see the evolution of that particular term as you get older and like you change context. I found community in very similar ways, being kind of a transplant from Illinois here, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say go Bears, since we're both
Right.
UC Berkeley folks on the call here. But yeah, it's been cool to see the industry, like the tech industry, change, and for both of us being outside of the mainstream in that particular industry, community and support is one of the things that has kept me in it, because many days I wanted to quit and
Absolutely.
just do something different. So could you tell people
Right.
from your perspective, like what are in the tech industry, kind of in the roles that you've had, what are some of the um, insights or the nuggets or things that you would tell people to be on the lookout for, or pieces of advice that have helped you to like persevere in the space that we work in?
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard space to be in, right? I think there's a lot of, I don't know, maybe potentially controversial things that are happening right now in tech, in terms of, there's been like this reckoning, right, around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, for people who don't know the acronym. But I think there's like a bit of reckoning going on right now in that space, and it's one that I align myself pretty closely with because of my own experiences, right? And so I would say, for anyone who is maybe considering getting into tech or trying to actively get into tech right now, it's a very different landscape from when I started. And like I said, I had I had more or less just like answered some job posting for my first job, and they interviewed me, and it was like a short 2-3 hour process, and I had a job. Right now, people entering the tech space are having to send out hundreds of resumes and get rejected just as many times potentially, right, before finding a job, and they could be searching for a year or more. So it's like a very different landscape now. And one of the things that I realized over the course of my career is that yes, you can job search in that way, and sometimes it works out, but actually this is where community comes into play again. It's for better or for worse, it's also who you know and who knows you to a degree. And something that I found kind of surprising more recently is that a lot of people are finding opportunities from Twitter, for example, right?
Mhm.
Because as developers, they are engaging with each other on this like social media platform. And so you end up starting to recognize certain names and certain people, and by interacting and engaging with them, a hiring manager might notice you, right? And those conversations end up becoming like these like warm introductions into potential roles. And I feel like that's one of the ways to cut through the noise these days, because of just how competitive it is. And I have some thoughts around why it's so competitive and why it's so hard for new devs, but maybe I'll get into that a little bit later. I think other kind of like other learnings or other sort of like things I would want to share for people in the tech space is really around finding your support system and relying on that, because I think that imposter syndrome is like a really big thing in tech, especially, right? Of just like not really knowing if you're doing well or not, and feeling a lot of self-doubt and not really getting the validation that you need from managers or from more like experienced people on the team. And so finding yourself that community, that group who will support you and validate that you are doing good things, that you are good at what you do, is really important. Because when I think back on it, I don't know if I would have necessarily gone down this route of leadership had I myself had a technical mentor at the time when I was making this transition, because I do love that work of coding and creating and all of that. But I didn't know what that looks like for myself. I didn't have like role models who looked like me. I didn't have sort of like active mentorship during that period of time. And so I just didn't know what was next for me. So I thought that this jump into management was the right thing to do, because that just seemed to be the progression for most people. But more and more so, that's not the case anymore, right? You can still be a very sort of like very experienced and very like tenured engineer who is still writing code without having to go into people management. But I know that a lot of people feel like they're like forced into that because there was no other way to kind of like grow their careers. And so that's definitely something that I feel like, as I reflect on it, maybe my maybe my present day today would have been very different had I had the right support and the right community when I was transitioning into a leadership role.
Yeah, I probably laugh at my if I were asked to like start in tech and then write all the different roles and things that I would do from the very beginning, just in my own silo and echo chamber versus like how my career has turned out, as a result of leaning on communities and asking lots of questions and, hitting some road bumps for sure. But like those two paths are so different.
Absolutely.
I wonder, like, for people maybe that haven't like gotten into management yet, like, what was the switch like from being kind of an individual contributor? I write code, I submit it, I merge it into a branch, and we ship it. However, frequently, how was the transition from that kind of role over into being responsible for actually managing people and
Hmm.
motivating and leading a team?
Yeah. It's a tough transition, because you have to relinquish control over things that you used to have control over, right? Because now, as an individual contributor, as a software engineer, what you're accountable and responsible for is the code and the systems that you're building, right? And the software that you ship. Once you transition into a managerial role, you become responsible for the people and the processes, right? And not necessarily the code that gets shipped. And that's like it's a mental shift for a lot of people, and it's not necessarily like a shift that many would like want to make. But I think what people who haven't done it before sometimes don't realize is that it's actually, in my opinion, a reskilling of yourself, right? It's not like an up leveling or an upskilling necessarily, because those skills that you had as a software engineer of like solving problems and writing code, they are helpful in giving you context for the work that your team is doing, but that experience is not going to help you manage people and manage emotions and manage your own self and your own emotions too, right? Because as a manager, you also have to be more impartial, or like listen before you act, right? To a degree. And because my experience has been in startups primarily, there's a lot of that act and then like figure it out later type of mentality. So it's just like a huge shift, and I think that like reading about it, engaging and asking questions with people who are managers before doing it is really important, just to make sure that, if you are considering it, that you are looking at it with that perspective of this is a different role with a different set of skills that's required. And, do I have those skills or do I not have those skills? And, if it's something that you want to pursue, how do you develop the skills that you need?
Yeah, yeah. And setting the expectations appropriately and like knowing your true self to know whether you like who you are at the core of your person would even like doing this kind of new thing versus just the idea of for progressing in your career and like being in a position of leadership. Because I know for myself with the young family that I have, I'm like, I already have direct reports. I don't necessarily need a whole lot of them when I come into my like 9 to 5 because I'm
Yes.
juggling so much anyway. So yeah, for people who are watching or listening, don't force yourself into that. Take some time with yourself to know what you want, and definitely lean into community. Ask a lot of questions to people who have gone before you, and thank God for the internet. There's a lot of
Hmm.
articles, things that are out there in the on the web to benefit from as well. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So maybe since we're almost to halftime, we'll do a little bit of a lightning round, have a little bit of fun and give some more
Sure.
background on you, Amy. So I'll ask you some questions that are first thing that comes to mind, or just little quick hitters to give people a little bit more context. I love food. You mentioned Thai, and I love Thai food. So let's start with just food. Maybe top 3 dishes that you either love to cook or love to eat.
Oh my goodness, you're making me choose three. Oh, that's so hard. All right, let's see. So oh my gosh. Okay, so I love to make pie, like apple pie. That's like definitely up there on my list. Double crust always, because it's like a lot of times I feel like pie is just or like yeah, making pie. Sometimes like pie, the filling is like a vehicle for the crust a lot of times. So just like pie crust. Um, but then for Thai food, I would say that one of my favorite things of all time is a Southern curry that is like a fish curry with like coconut milk, and they serve it over rice noodles. And it's just really delicious. Definitely one of one of my favorite things. And then, one more, so hard. Sushi, always. I
Mhm.
would never say no to sushi. Yeah.
Very cool. I just had sushi yesterday. So a kid
Nice.
from the Midwest, I never had it, but then once I got to California, I was like, come on, like, why didn't anybody tell me about this awesomeness before? So that's awesome. Let's move to travel. Like a lot of us have been locked up for a long time. What are some places that are either on your like list of places to go that you've never been before, or places that you have been where you're like, okay, once things open up, I'm really excited to get back there?
Oh, goodness. Also a hard question. So I have been to New Zealand, but it's an incredible place. So I could spend more time there again for sure. Second on that list would be Japan.
Mhm.
Third on that list is, I would say, the Galapagos Islands, which I've also been to, but again, just not enough time for sure. And then one more that I haven't been to that I would love to just kind of check out. I guess it's like no specific place, but I just want to go explore some glaciers. It's one of those
Mhm.
things where I fear that we won't have many to look at soon, and so it'd be cool to go look at some glaciers and experience that.
Very cool. Yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of challenges our generation has right now. And as a parent, a lot of stuff that I'd love to show my children and hope that it's still there when they get to be my age. But
Yeah,
yeah, definitely lots of changes going on right now.
yeah.
Um, yeah, thanks for that. How about since we're talking about parenting and families a little bit, what are some things that your children are into or love to do, like your child's hobbies that are like, wow, that's cool that you like to do that?
Well, I mean, it's one of these things where it's like, so my son is really into vehicles,
Mhm.
mostly cars and like monster trucks, but it wasn't even at our like insistence or our like encouragement, right? We were like, yeah, I hope he'll be into like dinosaurs or space because that's the type of stuff that my husband and I really love. And then he decided that he just really loved cars. So it was like not a disappointment necessarily, but it's just like, it didn't overlap, but it's like cool that he has his own opinion on that, right? And that it wasn't influenced by us for sure because neither of us care about cars really. And so, it's I guess like the most like amazing thing about it is that he's like 3 years old, but he's a little person and he has opinions and he has thoughts and he has like there are things that he wants to do, and that's pretty cool because in the newborn days they're just like these little potatoes that like sit on the bed and they don't do anything, and so it's cool to see him kind of change into an actual like person.
Yeah, yeah. The flavor of the week on my side for my youngest is dandelions, like blowing flowers, and definitely dinosaurs is a big one. But the
Mm.
the thing that's like number one of all time, which both my wife and I scratch our head about, is Frozen. So he loves watching Frozen 1 and
That's great.
Frozen 2 and singing the songs and talking about
Oh, that
Anna
must be so cute though.
and Elsa and Sven. So like thanks Disney, I guess.
Right. Sort of.
So that was a cool lightning round. Maybe we transition over to some questions about, and this is in the interest of having folks who are watching benefit from like our knee scrapes and head bumps. If you're reflecting either on career or even parenthood, like there's honestly so many things I get wrong. What are some things that you would say in the last year or two, like during COVID, you've been able to say, ooh, um, I learned this about myself, or I learned this about this on the job, or this about this in my
Yeah.
family life that I could offer back to somebody as a learn from me, get to where you're going a little bit
Yeah.
faster based on this.
Oh goodness. I think the biggest thing there really is you are not your work.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things of my career has primarily been in the startup space,
Hmm.
right? And so there's a lot of that like emphasis in startups on like the vision and the mission of the company, and you're like dedicating yourself to changing the world, right? Which is true, but also a lot of people will internalize that and make that part of their identity, right? Which I definitely did when I was younger, and it was just like these long hours and burning yourself out because you're trying to make this thing successful, and you felt like that imperative to like give it all you've got, right? And I think that parenthood is something that has helped giving me perspective, but like COVID as well, in that people are not their work, and that's okay. And you can have a life outside of work. You should have a life outside of work, because that helps you potentially be more creative and more open while you're on the job, right? And you don't necessarily need to sort of like tie yourself to what you do as a person, because there's so many other things that you as a person have to offer the world that are not just the work that you do.
Yeah, yeah. I'd say for me, a lot of it is similar in that self-care and exercise and like getting out to reset and recharge a little bit.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's with my children and with my family. Sometimes it's just like, nope,
Yeah.
he's got to put his AirPods in and just walk
Yep.
around solo, kind of getting to know
Exactly.
myself and also like shifting a little bit. I am in business development and sales, so like the difference between being able to be a people person and be on site and in person with people
Yep.
versus making a persuasive argument or taking a customer escalation or dealing with some emotions from somebody over
Right.
Zoom or over video conference is totally different. So lots to learn
Absolutely.
in that space as well. So yeah, I hope from that response that people are pulling a couple of things away, but definitely be prioritizing your own self care and your own mental health. Like even in the Olympics, we've seen
Hmm.
Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles now do what's right for them, right? And there's nothing
Absolutely.
wrong with that, like at all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so I guess we like live in a culture where it's like so easy to like sacrifice, right? Sacrifice yourself for like this greater cause, or whatever it is that you may be working on. And it doesn't do anyone any good if you're burnt out, right? And so I guess like what I would say also to other leaders or managers who are like in charge of or in charge of people and have power over employees, right, is that if your best employees are working themselves to the bone and they are burnt out, then you're actually not getting the best work that you possibly could from them, right? And so it kind of behooves both the individual as well as the employer to really focus on that, like self-care and making space and decompressing from work. It's really important.
Yeah. I think since we're talking about employers and like business a little bit, since we're in a place that's weird where some like offices and corporations are open their doors and some are like, no, we're going to keep them closed. And like the Delta variant is like trending up a little bit. What have been your observations and like thoughts about just personal productivity and team productivity and like the need to go back versus, the power of remote and leaning into
Yeah.
standing up systems that as long as you're in communication and getting your stuff done, maybe I don't need to see you every single day.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan and advocate for remote work, but I also understand that different needs for different people, right? And that there are extroverts who want to go in the office every day, and they're like introverts like me who would be more than happy to like be remote forever. And some people who want something in between, right? And I think that my observations have been that there hasn't been a whole lot of strategy, I think, when people are talking about, kind of like the return to office plans that they have. And a lot of people are just figuring it out as they go, which I mean makes sense because we haven't had to deal with a global pandemic in this way before, right? but that said, I would say that as much as I support remote work, I think the flexibility is kind of the biggest piece of that. And so it's not to say, or it's not efficient or effective to say, okay, now we're going to be fully remote, we're going to do it forever, and we're just going to map out all the things that we did in person and just switch them over to virtual like tools and digital tools and things like that. Like that, it doesn't work that way, right? And so what I'm seeing is there are a lot of companies that are not putting a lot of thought into how they communicate, through what channels they communicate, what are the expectations in terms of communication from employees, right? And without thinking those things through, it doesn't really matter if you're in person, remote, or hybrid, because ultimately that communication will break down at some point if you aren't intentional about it. And so I do feel like that's something that, while there are a lot of policies rolling out, there's not necessarily a lot of like expectation setting and intention around the actual communication piece of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think a bunch of us are just keeping our fingers on the pulse and scrolling and reading and seeing what the updates are day by day. But
right.
yeah, safety first, and self-care is tied into that, definitely, over showing up and being in person.
Absolutely.
One thing that, as you were responding to that last question, I thought about was kind of the notion of kind of upskilling yourself and getting better at a current thing versus educating yourself on new things, like as you operate in a role. I know when probably both of us graduated from undergrad, the way that we thought about education and like keeping up to speed was totally different than what it is now. Could you talk a little bit about one, like your experience in like staying current and making sure that you're getting the right information and developing yourself so that you can lead effectively? And then I'll ask you like some questions about books and podcasts and just different things that you might recommend to other people as they're on that journey as well.
Sure. I mean, it's the idea of like education and learning and development has changed a lot in the years that we've been in the industry, right? When I first started working, the best way to learn something technical was to pick up the O'Reilly book on that topic and read through that book and work through the examples. I mean, and now there's boot camps, there's like, people streaming on Patreon. There's people that are doing YouTube courses, talking about stuff on Twitter, right? There's just like all these different platforms now by which you can just learn things. And so for me, for a lot of reasons, I mean, I also was diagnosed with ADHD last summer. And so that was like a revelation. But I mention it because it's actually hard for me these days to just like sit down and read a book, partially because of that, but also because I have a toddler and life is busy, all of those things, right? And so I don't sit down to read too many books these days, but I do consume a lot of specific social media content. And so I spend a lot of time like on Twitter, for example, but I'm not on Twitter to, to like post memes and stuff like that, right? I'm actually following a lot of people who are producing content about either like, new trends in technology or about like leadership philosophies and things like that. And so, I am able to take in sort of like those little bits of information and digest them, like as I'm doing other things. And it's like a much more approachable way for me to actually like keep up with my learning in kind of like smaller increments than saying like committing to a book, for example. Yeah. I still read, just not nearly as much as I did when I was younger.
Yeah. Same. Before the pandemic, I was in my car to San Francisco and back every day in that traffic, and Audible like became my best friend and knocked down so many titles. So maybe I'll transition over to like some ones that might rise to the top of your list to recommend, or podcasts or sites that you check pretty regularly for fresh content. You got any favorites for the audience to pay attention?
Yeah. So in regards to like newsletter / blog stuff, on leadership, one, there's it was through a Twitter account that I actually discovered them, but there's a small company in Canada called Raw Signal Group, and they publish a lot of great content about how to be a good manager and like leadership foundation and principles and things like that, which I thought was like really refreshing, primarily because it's a point of view that a lot of people maybe aren't necessarily thinking about when it comes to leadership. And so they kind of approach everything with like this lens of inclusivity and building like psychological safety within teams to really like help develop sort of the best culture and sort of like the highest performing teams. And so that's definitely one site that once I had discovered them a handful of months ago, that I like highly recommend to everyone else who is in sort of like the leadership space. And then with regards to reading and books and things like that, I have actually been doing a lot of reading around DEI topics and like anti-racism and things of that nature, which may not even necessarily be like management or leadership books, but it's important for me right now to really like read and process and digest a lot of that, because ultimately, my thought on all of this is that companies that are striving to build diverse teams may be able to do that by hiring people from underrepresented backgrounds into their team. But if the environment that they are creating and the culture within their company is not one that is inclusive of those people that they are bringing in, then those people just like go out the door the other end, right? And so you have like that revolving door of employees, and it's something that's like a big deal in the tech space right now, because like I said, right, a lot of reckoning over the last couple of years around that. And people say it's a hard problem, and it is, but it also is because of kind of like this foundation of belonging and inclusion that doesn't exist in a lot of teams and a lot of companies. And so by kind of doing this reading to just learn about the history, the context, why certain things exist, the practices that we have like as businesses, why do they exist, right? Being able to kind of like read some of that stuff and understand where that comes from is really helpful in thinking about how should this look in the future if you're trying to build, like an inclusive team.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And it's a constant, like I've got this eternal student hat on, like always, because you
Right.
can never, even as a African-American, like Black person in this country, after graduating from undergrad, I've learned so much from then up until present day about my own history, my own culture, my own everything. And the move from Illinois to California, kind of the many other ethnicities and cultures and communities that are here that are different, has really helped to open my mind and to give me compassion and empathy for people that
Absolutely.
I otherwise kind of wouldn't have crossed paths with. But it is work, and it does take like conversations that I have and dialogue in order for us to ask the questions and ascertain the things that we need. So hopefully, this small thing that we're doing with this series is one kind of component of the overall education that our whole country, our whole world kind of needs in order to get from the next, or from where we are to the next step.
Absolutely. And I guess I didn't actually mention any names of people, but if those of you listening are looking for either people to follow on Twitter or like books by these people as well, there's people like Michelle Kim. She has a book coming out. There's Ijoma Oluo, who wrote Mediocre, and there's actually some interesting stories in her book about things like the way that we do time tracking right now, as like in businesses and corporations, and how that actually ties back to slavery and practices during that time. And so that was like kind of like this eye-opening thing that I learned. Other people like on Twitter, there's people like Kim Creighton, there's Nicole Sanchez. They're all DEI practitioners, and also sort of like leading the way on building equitable and inclusive teams.
Yeah. Fun fact from earlier today, I learned that the filibuster that they use in politics was primarily used when it was created to provide these long vetoes to civil rights legislation that was being put forward to try
Mm,
to abolish some of those systems. So like
yeah,
to learn the history of a thing is so interesting and fascinating and mind blowing sometimes. So yeah, if you're
absolutely.
watching or listening to this, yeah, that eternal student hat, I'm hoping that you put it on based on our discussion today.
Yeah.
Um, so we've just got like I think about 10 more minutes left, and wanted to kind of shift over to like your hopes for the future and things that maybe bring you joy these days and inspiration and hope as you kind of look from where you sit on into the next handful of years here. So what inspires you? What
Yeah,
brings you out of bed every morning and motivates you to get going?
absolutely. I guess for me, it's really just the people that I could be working with, I guess, as strange as that may sound. And so, I had mentioned that I'm between roles right now. And when I was like kind of like very actively in my search, I'm nearing it now. But when I was like actively in my search, right, there were a handful of things that I was looking for, right? And I could sum those up to be primarily like, for me, selfishly, right? Or like sort of like my own career desire is to be able to build and lead an engineering team, and prove that it is possible to do that in a way where you are prioritizing the people and their safety and their needs, but still have them be able to, execute and deliver product and, help the company succeed, right? And basically just build a team that is not exploitative, I guess. But beyond that, it's like the thing that gets me up in the morning and to like do this job search, and what makes me excited about some of the companies that I've talked to is really the people that kind of share these same values and want the same things in their teams, right? And are willing to, yes, put on that learning hat, challenge the status quo, not settle for the way things that have the way that things have always been done, right? And that's, I think, what's most exciting for me, because I think I've reached a point in my own leadership career where, I've made plenty of mistakes, and I've had a lot of success as well. But in my next role, I don't necessarily just want to take my successes and just transfer them over and just do the same thing the way that I have been doing. And so I'm excited about really being able to take all the things that I've learned, all the good stuff that I've seen, and like roll that into one place and be able to really build, I guess, like a new model for leadership. And what does it mean to actually create a space where people can be included, people can feel like they belong, right? And that that is not just sort of like this performative thing that companies say when they say, we're diverse and we're inclusive and all of those things. So I basically want to be able to walk the walk, right? In addition to talking the talk. And so I, get inspired because there are a lot of companies who are actually doing doing this these days, and a lot of them are up and coming, sure. But it's really, I think that's what keeps me in tech, knowing that there are people who want to change the way that it's been.
Yeah, yeah. Same. There's a lot of, things that technology is doing to help people, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stories that I have become aware of and I'm personally, part of, that let me know that there's lots of good that has happened and then lots more good that can happen
Right,
if we stay with it. So yeah, I
right.
appreciate that. And I guess at this point, we'll want to say on behalf of like our community and everybody that'll watch and listen to this, we want to give you your flowers and say thank you for
Thanks for
dedicating
having
some
me.
time and investing some time with us. And maybe the very last question I'll ask is like, how can we as a community, help you? What are things that we might be able to keep in our back pocket to consider, as we do our own work, or very tangible things that we as a community could do to move your work forward?
Yeah. Keep an open mind, I guess. That's sort of like the baseline of what I suppose I would ask for. And that's because, things are changing, but change is hard. And it's really easy to get defensive, right? Because we're human beings, and to feel like that maybe we personally have like done something bad, right? When challenged about something. But ultimately, keeping an open mind, being willing to learn, being willing to apologize, and then actually, take action to kind of reflect the new things that you've learned, right? I think is just so important. And with the work that I'm doing around building teams and redefining culture, I mean, that's like my one ask of everybody, right? Is to like keep that open mind and keep learning and evolving who you are as a person.
Yep. That's like a mic drop. I could finish the conversation with that with ease. Let me tell you one funny thing I saw earlier today, because I think it's also important to laugh and be smiling on this journey as well. I saw this joke in our Slack, and I thought it was so funny. I'll ask it to you. Did you know that Mortal Kombat, the game, is actually based on a Scandinavian church song? And the punchline is like, oh yeah, it's a Finnish, Finnish hymn, Finnish hymn.
Gosh, oh
So
my goodness.
engineering joke of the day. Hope everybody can
I
a
was
little bit
gonna
on that one.
say, I could count on you to bring the dad jokes.
Yeah. That's another cool thing about being in engineering organizations. There's so many like little channels of jokes and like things that quote unquote nerds find funny that have made me chuckle for well over 15 years now. So
Absolutely. Oh, there's so much out there.
yeah. Well, Amy, thanks so much again. Have a great weekend. Thanks for the conversation, and looking forward to all the good stuff that's going to come out of you and your teams and your family and your community as we move forward.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.